President Trump's job approval rating has ticked up, but many of his party's policy positions are viewed as out of the mainstream, and there is broad opposition to his effort to fund a border wall by declaring a national emergency, the latest Wall Street Journal NBC News poll finds. 20 months before the next presidential election, Mr. Trump's job approval rating, at 46%, is similar to those of Presidents Clinton and Obama at this point in their terms, though personal ratings of Mr. Trump are below those of the two Democratic predecessors. The poll also found Democratic primary voters looking for a nominee with aggressive policy ideas. Some 55% who said they intended to vote in a Democratic primary want a candidate who proposes larger-scale policies that might cost more, while 42% prefer a candidate with a smaller scale and less expensive agenda. And a majority of the party's primary voters said they would pick a candidate who shares their views on issues over one, perceived as having the best chance to defeat Mr. Trump.mr. Trump's approval rating in the survey, which interviewed 900 Americans from February 24-27, ticked up 3 percentage points from December and January to reach 46%. Some 52% disapproved of his job performance, down from 54% in each of the previous 2 months. Mr. Trump's approval rating has been remarkably static since taking office in January 2017. The journal NBC News poll has found between 43% and 47% of Americans approving of the president's job handing in every poll since last June. The journal NBC News pollsters, Democrat Fred Yang and Republican Bill McIntyre, attributed Mr. Trump's improved rating to an uptick in support from white men without a college degree. The 2016 Trump voters are coming back to him, Mr. Yang said. Amid the increased approval rating, the poll found an array of warning signs for Mr. Trump.mr. Trump leads a generic Democratic opponent, 46% to 40%, in 5 Midwestern states he carried in 2016: Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. But he trails a generic Democrat, 50% to 39%, in 5 Sun Belt states Democrats aim to flip in 2020: Arizona, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, and Texas. Mr. Trump's effort to declare a national emergency to fund a wall on parts of the southern border with Mexico is opposed by 60% of those polled, compared with 39% who approve. Support for Mr. Trump's emergency declaration, like much of his agenda, breaks along party lines, though with some defections from his fellow Republicans. Among Democrats, 94% oppose the emergency order, while 5% approve. Among Republicans, 76% approve, while 22% disapprove. Independents oppose by a 62% to 36% margin. The poll also found that majorities of Americans believe the Democratic position on climate change, healthcare, immigration and abortion rights are within the political mainstream, while majorities see the GOP position on those issues as outside of the mainstream. On fiscal issues and taxes, a roughly equal number of people found both parties within and outside the mainstream of opinion. The poll gave hints that this could shift as Democratic presidential candidates and lawmakers add detail to their proposals. When respondents were asked whether they were willing to pay higher taxes so that everyone could have health care coverage, half said yes and half said no. Assessing Mr. Trump's position ahead of the 2020 election, Mr. McIntyre, the Republican pollster, noted that 53% of Americans in the survey said they didn't expect an economic recession in the next year, compared with 33% who foresaw one. As long as the economic numbers look like this, and there are no combat deaths around the world, that always keeps an incumbent president in the game. He said. Warning signs for Mr. Trump, he said, include a core of voters who say they won't consider supporting his re-election, along with the majorities of voters who say Democrats are in the political mainstream on key issues while Republicans aren't. When a candidate's approval ratings are in the low to mid-40s, Mr. McIntyre said, you're in the ballgame, but you're on the soft end of the stick in terms of a starting point to where you need to be in a two-person race. Mr. Yang, the Democratic pollster, said Democrats aiming to win back the White House should be wary of an economy widely seen as strong, as well as the Democratic tilt among people who say the country needs a third party in national elections. Those Democrats could be at risk of voting for an independent. To me, that's a caution signal, Mr. Yang said. Mr. Trump retains strong support within the GOP. The poll found 37% of Republicans would like to see a primary challenge to the president, a number that is lower than the 41% of Democrats who wanted to see an intramural challenge to Mr. Obama in 2012 or the 66% who hoped for a primary against Mr. Clinton in 1996. Neither was Clinton nor Obama faced an organized primary opponent in their successful re-election bids. The poll found, by a 56% to 40% margin, that Democratic primary voters prefer a candidate they agree with to one seen as having the best chance to win. The split is most pronounced among younger voters and those who classify themselves as lean Democratic as opposed to strong Democratic. Older voters and more reliable party members were more likely to back a candidate who can win, the poll found. Just 36% of Democratic primary voters say they are comfortable with a candidate who is at least 75 years old, a potential warning sign for Vermont's Sen. Bernie Sanders, who's 77 years old, and potential candidates such as former Vice President Joe Biden, 76 years old, and former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg, who is 77 years old. The poll was conducted from February 24 to February 27, as Mr. Trump traveled to Vietnam for his second summit with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, but before he returned home without completing a denuclearization agreement. The margin of error for the full sample was 3.27 percentage points.